Hey guys, this is Brother Ray Jones with the First Church of God in Princeton, West Virginia. I want to welcome you to our midweek Bible study. I want to thank you for taking time to join in on this time of learning and growing together. I am thrilled and humbled that you would share some of your time with me to look into the Word of the Lord together. While folks are logging on and getting in with this lesson tonight, I just want to encourage you to participate. You feel free to wave or let us know you're here. If you hear something you like, you are welcome to put amen or whatever in the comments. If you have some questions, if you have some comments or anything like that, you feel free to just participate in any way on this. We do appreciate not only you tuning in, but also participating in the study. We're going to be talking tonight, continuing in our study on the life of Joseph from the Old Testament. And the title of our lesson is Good Things Come to Those Who Faithfully Wait. Our text will be Genesis, the 41st chapter. So if you would be turning to Genesis chapter 41. And we're going to talk tonight about something that I can't say I'm very good at. We're going to be talking about patience. They say patience is a virtue. And there are a whole lot of days where I don't feel very virtuous, if you know what I mean. I'm just not really a patient person by nature. And this kind of reveals itself in traffic. A lot of times when I'm driving along, I have been known to talk to vehicles that I believe could travel a little faster or do a little better. I hope you don't think less of me for that. I just want to be honest with you this evening. I kind of talk to traffic. I don't talk to the drivers specifically. You know, I don't get out of my vehicle and go over and confront them or anything like that. That would take way too long, and it would just make the trip even longer, right? But I have been known to talk to traffic, kind of like a lot of people talk to their television set during a football game. You know what I mean? And if there was a black box recording device in the cab of my truck, you might hear some statements from time to time that go along the lines of this. Hey, that light's green. You can go anytime now. Or on occasion, you might even hear, Christmas is 11 months away. What are you waiting for? I know I shouldn't be this way. But in my defense, I am learning to be more patient. So one of the things I try to keep in mind as I grow in this area of my life is that some of the best things in life often take time to produce. I'm not sure that plays into traffic that I think could go faster, but I do know it plays into great food. The best tasting food that I've ever had in my mouth did not come out of a microwave. It came out of a crock pot, or maybe from a smoker even. And it had been marinated for hours, if not days. And it may have taken a long time, maybe that long or more, to cook. And boy, when you get some slow-cooked, marinated meat, it just doesn't get any better than that, my friends. It takes time. And microwaves aren't designed for long-term cooking. They're to cook or heat something up very quickly, and then you go ahead and get to eat it quick. And they have their place, don't get me wrong. I got a microwave at my house, and before the day is up, I'll probably throw a pepperoni roll in there and heat that thing up for about 22 seconds and then eat it. But it's not made for cooking the greatest food. Microwaves really are made for heating things up and defrosting things. So you get the idea. But patience pays off in more areas than just great food. And Isaiah reminds us of this. In Isaiah, the 40th chapter, verses 30 and 31, the prophet writes these words, Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Now, I'm finding this to be true. I'm not a perfect example of it by any means, but I'm on the journey. Okay? But the Old Testament character Joseph definitely found this to be true. And we're going to pick up his story tonight in Genesis chapter 41. So our study of Joseph up to this point has covered just a few chapters of Scripture, but in those chapters, they represent over a decade of his life. This dreamer has been abused by his siblings and taken to a foreign land, falsely accused by his master's wife, and forgotten by a cellmate after he was thrown in jail. The only constant in this piece of history is that the Lord was with Joseph. The question we have is, will things ever turn around for the better for Joseph? Well, tonight we're going to see just that. So look with me in Genesis, the 41st chapter, at verse 1. We're going to see after Joseph had successfully interpreted dreams for two prisoners, here's what happened to him. Genesis 41 verse 1 says this: Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Think about that with me for a moment. While Joseph was in prison, 2 of Pharaoh's officers, if you will, 2 of his employees, his high-ranking employees, had been put in prison. And while they were there, they each had dreams, and Joseph interpreted those dreams. And the butler or cupbearer, turns out he was going to get restored to his job. And the baker, in his dream, the interpretation of it was that he was going to get executed. And sure enough, the interpretations that Joseph had received from the Lord about these dreams, they were accurate. And the baker was executed, and the butler or cupbearer was restored to his job. And Joseph had asked the cupbearer, hey, when you get back with Pharaoh, would you remember me and put in a good word for me? Well, here's what happened. The cupbearer forgot. And he forgot Joseph for 2 full years. Think about that. 24 months. How long is 2 years? Well, if you paid off your car loan in 2 years, that would be pretty impressive. But to be in a dungeon for 2 years, that would seem like an eternity. And that's where Joseph was. For 24 full months or 2 years, he was in prison, in a dungeon. He had 2 years of routine and drudgery during this time. And the guy that he had helped encourage, the cupbearer, just forgot all about him. But in this 2-year period of time, I believe there was something else going on in Joseph's life. I believe this was not only a time of drudgery and routine, but I believe it was a time of God refining Joseph and molding him more into the person that God wanted him to be. I would like to think that we can all learn our great lessons through easy times and good times. But personal experience, the testimony of others, and the witness of Scripture tells me differently. In Psalm, the 119th chapter, beginning at verse 65, the psalmist declares these words: You have dealt well with your servant, O Lord, according to your word. Teach me good judgment and knowledge, for I believe your commandments. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. You are good and do good. Teach me your statutes. The proud have forged a lie against me, but I will keep your precepts with my whole heart. Their heart is as fat as grease, but I delight in your law. It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I may learn your statutes. The law of your mouth is better to me than thousands of coins of gold and silver. Did you hear those words this evening? The psalmist made the declaration that he made the confession that before he had gone astray, or before he was afflicted rather, he went astray. But through his affliction, he learned to keep the word of the Lord. He later testifies in verse 71, "It was good for me that I've been afflicted, that I may learn your statutes." Now, does that mean that that David had to be afflicted in order to learn the statutes of the Lord? Not necessarily. What it does mean beyond the shadow of any doubt is that while he chose maybe to stray, it was through his afflictions that God did bring about these teaching moments that maybe David didn't get any other way. Maybe you've experienced some times like that. And maybe it could be not that you've done anything wrong, it's just that some lessons maybe just don't come through quite as strongly unless we're going through difficult times. In the Old Testament, there is perhaps no other character, not only in the Old Testament, but in all of history, who suffered as much as Job. If you go back and you read his story, man, he lost family, he lost fortune, he lost his health. His friends who were supposed to comfort him was accusing him of doing something wrong. His wife, who arguably was also grieving deeply, just looked at him at one point and said, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" So here's Job in all of his affliction. But he declared in the middle of all of his grief, and much of the book of Job is about his grieving and him crying out to God. But in Job 23, verses 10 through 12, he makes this declaration. He knows, but he, speaking of God, knows the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I've kept his way and not turned aside. I've not departed from the commandment of his lips. I've treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Job makes this declaration in the middle of all of his grief, believing that God's going to see him through the trial that he's facing, and on the other side of it, he's going to come out as gold. Whenever gold is mined, it's not found in its purest state. It has deposits in it. It has minerals, other minerals in it. It has dross in it, if you will. And it needs to be purified to get all the impurities out. And it's usually purified not by caressing it, but by putting it in fire. A lot of times God allows us to go through difficult circumstances so that his nature can be revealed in us, and that our hearts and our minds and our souls can be purified, and we can look more like him. Now, I got to be honest with you tonight. I would much rather learn all the lessons I'm supposed to learn and become the person I'm supposed to be in Christ through easy times. But unfortunately, it does not really work that way all the time. Sometimes it takes difficulties to teach us and to refine us into the people that God wants us to be. Joseph kind of bears record of this. Let's pick up his story in verse 2. We see, as we pick up in verse 2 of Genesis 41, that things turn around for Joseph in an unexpected way. So Pharaoh has a dream, and it goes like this. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. So look at what's going on here. At this point, Pharaoh starts having dreams. Kind of like the cupbearer had a dream, and so did the baker. And Pharaoh has 2 dreams in one night, and they disturb him. And as we just read about, you got these 7 cows coming up out of the river, healthy and good looking, and 7 sickly cows come out after that and devour the 7 healthy cows. What's up with that? Then he goes back to sleep, and he has the 7 heads of grain that look great and are wonderful, and then 7 more come up that are just full of plight and disease, and they devour the healthy heads of grain. So what is going on with all of this? And he's disturbed by these dreams, and he's asking for help in interpreting them, and all of his magicians and the wise men of Egypt have no clue what's going on. It's then the cupbearer comes up with this revelation. Pick it up in verse 9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. Wow, okay, good. Something jogged his memory. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we had a dream in one night, he and I. Each one of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him, meaning the baker. So Joseph was forgotten for 2 years. And now all of a sudden, when Pharaoh has a dream, the cupbearer, the light turns on in his head. Oh, wait a minute. Pharaoh's had a dream and nobody can interpret it. I know a guy. Ooh, he's in prison. By the way, I think he asked me to put in a good word for him. Well, now's the time to put in that good word. So here's what happens next as we pick it up in verse 14. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. He shaved and changed his clothing, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood at the bank of the river, and suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. And then, behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. The gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, and there was no one who could explain it to me. So here, Pharaoh sends for Joseph. He believes Joseph might be able to help him. And when he asked Joseph if Joseph can interpret dreams, did you know Joseph's reply? He gave glory to God. He gave credit to his Creator. And he said, Pharaoh, I can't tell you a thing, but the God I know and the God I serve, he can tell both of us anything and everything we need. Notice also in these verses that when Joseph shows up in Pharaoh's court, guess who else was most likely there in that moment? The cupbearer. And there's no hint in these verses of Joseph giving the cupbearer the stank eye or anything, right? He just goes in and is humbled and glad to get the opportunity to serve. He did not begrudge the cupbearer or complain about his mistreatment. That's not an easy place to get to, my friends. But Joseph was there. So after hearing Pharaoh's dreams, he trusts God and gives the following interpretation. Listen to this as we pick it up in verse 25. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are also 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food for those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land of the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So Joseph is able to properly interpret these dreams, and he again gives credit to God. Throughout this entire time, you remember Joseph when he was 17 years old? He had these dreams, and he was running off bragging to his brothers and to his dad about all this great stuff and how great Joseph was and all that kind of deal. Well, that was 13 years prior, as we're going to see. A lot happened in 13 years. And while a lot of things happened to Joseph that maybe shouldn't have, there were some things that happened in Joseph that needed to happen. God was refining Joseph during this time. He was squeezing some things out of him that didn't really need to be there. So Joseph is now a humble man serving the Lord and careful to give credit to his Creator. He offers the interpretation of this dream. He says what's going to happen is that there's going to be 7 good years of plenty, and then after that there's going to be a famine, and the 7 years of famine is going to make it like there's been no good years ever in the history of Egypt. God was giving Pharaoh a warning, and he was working through Joseph to make him aware of this warning. So after Joseph gives the interpretation, he then offers some advice. He says, hey, here's what you really ought to do. You ought to put somebody in charge of these 7 good years, and establish someone who can, during these 7 good years, take 1/5 of all the grain and store it back up, because there's going to be a rainy day coming. Actually, it's going to be more than a day. It's going to be 7 years of famine. And as he does this, he offers this advice, but he's not promoting himself. He's not even hinting that he wants the job. He simply, humbly, and wisely offers something that is a very good idea. And as a result of that, we see that Joseph gets an amazing promotion. Pick it up in verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the 2nd chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife as Asnath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Look at what's going on here. In just a matter of hours, maybe even moments, Joseph goes from second in command among prisoners to second in command over all of Egypt. Things turned around for him seemingly on a dime. But they really didn't turn around that quickly. You see, God had been preparing Joseph for years for just this moment. Joseph wasn't ready as a 17-year-old jerk, arrogant kid. Joseph wasn't ready at that time in his life. Now, his brothers should not have sold him into slavery. It did not have to go that route. But since it did, God was still with Joseph. And he worked in and through Joseph. And Joseph realized he needed to depend on God. And as God was with him, think about his story all throughout these years. He ends up, I believe, by the providence of God, in Potiphar's household. And he rises to authority there, to Potiphar's second-hand man. Now, God didn't want Potiphar's wife to accuse him of rape and come on to him and all those kind of things. But since it happened, and Joseph ended up in prison, he rose to a position of responsibility and authority there. He became second in command in that section of the prison because God was with Joseph. And I believe when the time was just right, God used all of these circumstances to refine Joseph's character. Joseph was now looking way more like gold than he had ever looked in his entire life. He was broken in the right way, and he was ready to be used of the Lord. Now, Joseph had some great success, and we get a glimpse of his initial success in the final few verses of Genesis 41. Pick it up with me in verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food in the 7 years that were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Joseph had some amazing success here. And to people who didn't know his whole story, they would think, wow, Joseph became an overnight success. We know better, don't we? This success was 13 plus years in the making. And it took a lot of refining work, a lot of gut-wrenching work, a lot of inside work on Joseph's part. He had to allow God to do these things in and through him. And all of that behind-the-scenes work brought him to this point in his life. My friends, there's no such thing as an overnight success. People who seem to be overnight successes have been working long and hard, and they avail themselves, if you will, of the right opportunities at the right time. In this case, the right opportunity was ordained by the Lord, and Joseph was able to move into that because he let God do in and through him what only God could do. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. Now he's 30. Actually, a little bit older by the time we get to the end of the chapter. He's pushing 37. So we're looking at 13 to 20 years. And some of those years were really, really good, but a whole lot of them were filled with some very difficult times. He was abused by his brothers. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. He was forgotten by the cupbearer. And yet through all of those difficulties, he kept his faith in God, and the Lord was with Joseph. Now we see, after patiently waiting, sometimes he just had to wait, and maybe he wasn't patient, I don't know. But he had to learn some patience through all of this time. And his faithfulness is now being rewarded because he now is Pharaoh's right-hand man. As we close this out tonight, we're ending this at a good point in Joseph's life. He's no longer a slave. He's no longer a prisoner. He is in a place of honor. And he's in that place of honor because the Lord was with him. And the Lord can now use him in that place. He can trust Joseph to handle that responsibility. Joseph had to wait to get to that point. So as we wrap this up tonight, I simply want to encourage us. I don't know what you're waiting on. I don't know where God has you at this particular moment. But if you're in one of those waiting seasons, will you simply trust God to see you through that? Where you're at is for now. It does not have to be forever. It may seem like forever, but trust me, it's not. God will see you through. Will you wait on him? Will you simply trust him to do in and through you what only he can do? While you're waiting, will you pray? Will you study? Will you live for the glory of God? And will you listen to what the Spirit and the Word have to tell you? And will you let God's Spirit and God's Word refine you and make you into the person that he wants you to be? And please be encouraged in this one thing. While others had forgotten Joseph, God had not forgotten him. And while others may have forgotten you tonight, God's not forgotten you. He knows exactly where you are. My comrades and I, and my colleagues, pastors, preachers, we're noted for looking at people and pointing fingers and saying, hey, God knows what you're doing. If you're doing something wrong, God knows it. And that is true. You can't hide anything from God. But let me tell you something else that's true. When you're doing the right thing and everybody else has forgotten about it or no one else is acknowledging it, God knows that too, my friend. And he will reward you in due time. Don't give up on God. Be with the Lord and let the Lord be with you. Good things come to those who patiently and faithfully wait. Joseph teaches us that tonight. Thank you for your time this evening. I hope you've received a blessing. I look forward to catching up with you next week as we continue in this study of the life of Joseph. God bless you and have a good night.